When you hear the words Spanish Empire, you probably imagine ships packed with gold, fearless explorers mapping the unknown, and a kingdom stretching across half the globe. But behind the glory and grandeur, there's a side of history most textbooks refuse to tell. A story drenched in blood, betrayal, and brutality. How did a relatively small European kingdom suddenly become one of the most feared empires in history? What ruthless tactics fueled that meteoric rise? And why do so many of these horrifying truths remain buried beneath layers of myth and propaganda, even today? To understand the true cost of Spain's so-called Golden Age, we need to go back to the 15th century, when European powers were racing to carve up the world. Spain, armed with religious zeal, firepower, and a thirst for wealth, didn't just join the race. They rewrote the rules with violence, deception, and unrelenting greed. From the genocidal conquest of the Americas, to the enslavement of millions, to the systematic erasure of entire civilizations, the Spanish Empire's dark legacy still shapes the world today. This is the brutal truth about the Spanish Empire, and it's time the real story was told. The so-called Age of Discovery sounds romantic. Brave explorers crossing uncharted waters, discovering new lands and expanding human knowledge. But for Spain, discovery wasn't the goal. It was just a euphemism for conquest, plunder, and annihilation. It all started with Christopher Columbus, whose voyages weren't about science or trade, but gold and glory. When Columbus landed in the Caribbean, he didn't find cities paved with gold, but instead thriving indigenous communities living in harmony with their land. That didn't stop him. Within decades, those communities were enslaved, massacred, or worked to death, all in the name of Spanish wealth. The first victims were the Taino people of Hispaniola, who saw their population collapse by over 90% within a generation. Some were forced into brutal labor on plantations. Others were hunted for sport, and many more died from European diseases, deliberately weaponized by the Spanish to weaken any resistance. But Columbus was just the beginning. His discovery fever triggered a gold rush that fueled the next wave of Spanish expansion, each expedition more brutal than the last. The encomienda system was introduced, a legalized system of forced labor where indigenous people were handed over to Spanish colonists like cattle, forced to work in mines and fields under inhuman conditions. Even religious conversion became a weapon. Spanish missionaries would preach salvation with a sword in one hand and a cross in the other. Refusing conversion to Christianity often meant execution or being tortured to death as an example to others. The sheer scale of violence and destruction unleashed on the Caribbean set the stage for what would happen across the Americas. From Cuba to Puerto Rico to Mexico, Spain wasn't just building an empire. It was systematically erasing entire cultures to replace them with gold mines, sugar plantations, and Catholic missions. And behind it all was the hunger for gold, a relentless greed that drove Spain's explorers deeper into the continent, leaving a trail of blood wherever they went. In their own words, the Spanish justified their atrocities as civilizing savages. But to the millions who died, it was simply genocide in the name of empire. The Age of Discovery wasn't about discovery at all. It was about conquest and carnage. And Spain was just getting started. The Spanish Empire didn't just conquer land, it turned entire populations into fuel for its growing economy. From the Caribbean to South America, human exploitation became the backbone of Spain's empire, and slavery was the system that made it all possible. At first, the Spanish enslaved indigenous populations in the Americas, forcing them into back-breaking labor under the encomienda system. In theory, this system was supposed to protect indigenous people by integrating them into Spanish society in exchange for labor. In reality, It was legalized slavery, where indigenous communities were handed over to Spanish settlers who worked them to death in mines, fields, and workshops. But the indigenous population was dying at alarming rates, slaughtered in wars of conquest, killed by disease, or worked to exhaustion. To fill the labor gap, Spain turned to a new source of human capital, the transatlantic slave trade. Over the next several centuries, Spain would become a major player in the trafficking of millions of Africans, ripped from their homelands and sold like livestock to colonial plantations across the Caribbean and Latin America. On sugar plantations, in gold mines, and in every corner of Spain's New World Empire, enslaved Africans lived and died under horrific conditions, fueling the wealth flowing back to Madrid. The silver mines of Potosi, located in modern-day Bolivia, became the ultimate symbol of human exploitation under the Spanish crown. Indigenous people, alongside enslaved Africans, were forced into deep, dangerous tunnels, breathing in toxic dust, working by candlelight, and rarely living beyond their 20s. The silver they mined flooded into Spanish treasuries, funding wars, palaces, and the illusion of European supremacy, all paid for in blood. For Spain, human life was just another resource, no different than gold or sugar, something to be extracted, exploited, and discarded once it was no longer profitable. Empires aren't built on ideals or exploration. They're built on stolen labor, human suffering, and mountains of corpses. By the time the Spanish Empire began to decline, millions of indigenous and African lives had been extinguished, sacrificed at the altar of Spanish greed. And the systems of racial hierarchy, economic inequality, and institutional violence Spain created still shape Latin America today. Spain's wealth didn't just come from the earth. It came from the bodies and blood of the people it enslaved. Enjoying our content? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a video. Watch more of our videos now and stay tuned for awesome content.